Hello and welcome to another Articulate Storyline tutorial. This one is all about how to use triggers. And triggers are actually one of the best features of Articulate Storyline because it's how you make the experience interactive. So it's what really sets apart a tool like Storyline from a tool like PowerPoint, because when you can use triggers effectively, you can set up interactions that people can do on their own time from their own computers. So let's dive into it. I have a file prepared for you here, and I actually even included some challenges this time. So if you want to go ahead and download that file so that you can follow along and try the challenges and practice what you're learning as you learn it, you can do that with the link in the description. Feel free to pause the video and do that now. Otherwise, we will dive right in. Okay, so here is the storyline file I have for us. And just a quick orientation. This scene right here has all the slides I'm going to show you, and this scene over here has the resolutions to the challenges I'm going to show you. So we'll just start on the first slide. You already heard me say this, but yeah, triggers are really, really fun. If you're new to Storyline and you haven't used this yet, you're probably going to have a lot of fun today. So yeah, because this is what Storyline is all about. It's about creating interactive experiences. So for example, you can do simple interactions like when the user clicks on this button, we can make something happen. And in this case, we want to make it so that when the user clicks on this button, it brings us to our next slide, which has some more information. So to create a new trigger, you will look over in this triggers panel over here on the right side of the screen. And you'll have some options right beneath that. So the first option is what we're looking for. It's that create a new trigger button. You can either click on that or you can select Control K on your keyboard or Command K if you're on a Mac. The keyboard shortcuts, like watch, my mouse can be over here. I press Control K and it opens up that trigger wizard. So the earlier you get comfortable with keyboard shortcuts in Storyline, the better. I also have a PDF, like a cheat sheet with all the shortcuts on it that you can download with the link in the description. But let's check it out. So we'll click on this create a new trigger button and it opens up the trigger wizard. You'll notice there are two pieces of this. The first piece of a trigger is the action. So this is like what we want to actually happen when the user does something, for example. And then the second piece of it is when. When do we want this action to take place? And I'll show you a really quick example here. We want the action to be jump to slide because we want to jump to the next slide. And most of these actions you'll see have multiple parts. So if the action is jump to the next, jump to slide, the next part of the action is like, which slide do we want to actually jump to? And you can click on that text and you could change that as well. But this is correct. We do want to jump to the next slide, which is slide 1.2. You can see over here on the left. And then the when, by default, it already says when the user clicks, but there are multiple parts of that too. We need to click which object we need the user to click. In this case, it's button 1. Okay, so if I click on that when, you'll see there are a lot of different options here. And in time, you're going to be familiar with every single one of these. On the next slide I have set up for us, though, I'll show you the most popular ones and the ones that you should definitely practice with if you're new to Storyline. But there we go. That's how we set up a trigger. This will work. Jump to slide, next slide when the user clicks button 1. And now I can click on OK. And you'll see over here on the right, this is where it shows us all of the triggers for any slide we're on. So if you see a trigger here, you know it's for something on this screen. If it's a different slide, it's going to be a different set of triggers. So I can preview this now. I'm going to select these two slides, click on this preview drop down, and then click on selected slides, and then we'll load up those two slides for us. Notice now my cursor, if I mouse over this begin button, it changes to the hand because it means that this is interactive now. So now when I click on this, sure enough, it brings us to that next slide. Okay, so that's the most basic trigger you'll probably create. When the user clicks a button, jump to a slide. That's a very common kind of trigger. Now another option here, you'll notice, beneath these object triggers, there's another heading called player triggers. And whenever you create a new slide, you'll probably see these on the slide because Storyline adds these by default. So again, and notice if we want to change something about one of these triggers, we can just click on the text directly from this trigger panel. We can double click on the trigger to open it up in this trigger wizard view, or we could select edit the selected trigger icon when it's selected. So there are a few ways to do it. I usually just change it right here or double click on it to open it up in this bigger view. Now, it says when the user clicks or swipes next. Now this next is on the player. Notice when I preview this, we don't actually see a player, we just see the slide. And And that's because I turned the player off for this tutorial. But if I click on player and then turn the menus and controls on, notice we have these next and previous buttons. So I'm going to preview this just to show you what's going on here. You might be confused if you see these triggers randomly. So in the bottom right, this is the next button on the player, and this is the previous button on the player. And so if I click on next here, if I had that other slide loaded up in the preview, it would jump to the next slide. But again, not important. I'm going to turn the player off. We don't need that. The other piece though that is important and that you should be aware of is notice it says when the user clicks or swipes next. And the swipe comes into play on mobile. So if you are, if someone's going through your experience on a mobile device and you leave these triggers on there, they're just going to be able to swipe their finger across the screen and it's going to bring them to the next slide, even if you don't want them to be able to go to the next slide yet. So that is very important. I'll show you what we can do about that. So what you could do if you're not relying on the player is you could just delete these triggers. Okay, so you can just click on the trigger and then press this trash can right here, or you could click on the trigger and then press the delete key on your keyboard. Those are two ways to do it. I'm going to press Control Z a couple of times to undo that because I want to show you can also select multiple triggers at one time. So you can click on one and then hold down the Shift key on your keyboard and click on another one, and then I can press the delete key. So, you could have all these triggers selected and then you can just delete them all at once. You can hold down the Control key to like select them like individually, and then Shift will select like all of the ones in between. So that's across the computer though, not specific to Storyline. You probably are familiar with that shortcut. But another option, if you mouse over these triggers, notice there are these little like lightning bolt icons with a line through them. That's the way to disable the triggers when you don't want them to be active. So if you were like never going to use them again, you should probably just delete them. But if you're like doing some troubleshooting or testing and you just want to disable those triggers for now, you can just, enable them and disable them. That can be really helpful sometimes during like troubleshooting. If you want to see like, oh, is this trigger causing a problem? Is this where the problem lies? You can just disable it instead of having to delete the whole thing and then recreate it afterwards. But again, we do not need these player triggers because we're not using the player. I could delete them. Something else about deleting them though, like look over here in the scenes view. Like I'm probably going to leave them on the next slides because I don't have a button on this slide that's bringing us to the next slide. Like notice how here I have this. When the user clicks button 1, jump to next slide. That's what tells this to organize itself like this over here on the left. Let me just show you. If I delete this trigger that jumps to the next slide, this slide 1.3 is just going to come up here next to the slides instead of beneath it. So let me show you. I'm going to delete this. And now you see it just ends at 1.2 and then 1.3 starts anew up here. It's because there's no trigger bringing us from 1.2 to 1.3. So I just want to show you that's why I'm going to leave these in, just so we have one nice long line. But in a real course, you're going to have some way for people to get to the next slide. But since I'm just like using this kind of as a PowerPoint, we don't need that. Okay. Moving along, let's get into some juicier stuff here. So here are the most common triggers that you should, at some point today or in the very near future, if you're not familiar with all of these, you should get comfortable with them. So for the actions, these are the most popular ones. You're going to change the state of things. And if you're not familiar with states yet, now would be a really good time to check out the states video that we recorded a couple of weeks ago. So that's like a full states masterclass. That's one of the most important building blocks of interactivity in Storyline. So check it out. Let me show you here. So we have this begin button. We're going to jump to the next slide when the user clicks it, but we have a state here called hover state. And this is a custom state. So like you've probably seen before, I can create a new trigger and I can change the state of that begin button to hover state. But we don't want to do it when the user clicks. Notice now is where we click that when drop down. We want to do it when the mouse hovers over. So if we click on that, now every time the mouse hovers over that, it will turn to that purple hover state color. And then some of the whens will have different options, like restore the previous state when the user hovers out. That means when we hover over it, it will turn purple. When we hover back out, it will turn back to blue. If we unchecked that, it would stay purple. So there we go. We have another trigger here now. And if we preview this, we can see how that works. And this is a trigger where we're changing the state of something. So very simple, but also very, very common. So make sure you're comfortable with states from the last video we did. Okay, here's another really common one, showing and hiding layers. That's the way you would use a trigger. Layers are handled down here. If you're not familiar with layers yet, we have a layers video going live next week, so go ahead and subscribe because that is another really important building block of all interactivity in Storyline and a really cool feature of Storyline. You've already seen this one. This one is very self-explanatory, jumping to different slides or different scenes. Very, very common trigger use. Playing, pausing, and stopping media. That's important too. Maybe you have a video playing on the slide, or maybe you have some audio that's playing and you want the user to be able to control when it starts, when it stops. You can use triggers for that and build interactivity around that. The restart course trigger, that can be somewhat popular too. If you click on that, if you execute that trigger, it basically just resets the whole thing. It brings you back to the first slide in the course with everything reset like a fresh load. You can stop and resume the timeline. So if you're not familiar with the timeline, we'll get to that in a later video as well. So subscribe if you want another masterclass on the timeline, but that's a very common trigger use. And then finally, adjusting variables, which again, we will cover in a later video. So these are the ones you should really be familiar with when we're looking at these different actions. So how I learned triggers is I just pulled up a slide and played around with all of these to see what they all did. And I suggest you do the same if you have some time to do so. But the whens, these are the most common whens. When the user clicks on something, when the mouse hovers over something, when the timeline starts or ends or reaches a certain point, or when a variable changes. So notice if we look at the trigger wizard, there are so many different whens here. There are so many. The ones that I have on this list, these are the ones you really need to be aware of. They're the ones you're going to use the most. And if you are more experienced with Storyline and you have a different view on this, let us know in the comments what other actions or whens you may use. Okay, finally, we are getting to some fun stuff, okay? I hope you're ready to practice because now is your chance to do so. So I have a few little exercises set up for you. So this one is called the Shape Changer 3000, okay? So our goal is to change the shape of the large object when the user clicks on the corresponding small object. So here's the large object, the big shape, and notice we have 3 different states. Again, check out the states masterclass if you're new to this. You could probably figure it out even without that though, maybe. We want to make it so that when the user clicks on the circle, it changes this to a circle. When they click on the triangle, it changes this to a triangle. And when they click on the square, it changes this back to the square. I'm going to preview this and show you what we've got already. I set up a button set with these 3 different buttons. So when you click on one of them, it turns that one purple and the other one's back to blue. So again, if you're not familiar with button sets and you want to see how we did that, check out the states video. But the challenge for you, and I suggest downloading this practice file and seeing if you can do it, is changing the state of this object when the user clicks on these ones. So go ahead and pause the video now if you want to give this a try on your own. Again, you can download it with the link in the description. Otherwise, I will just give you the reveal. Okay, so here we go with the reveal. So what we can do is we can click on this circle. And the benefit of clicking on something before you create the trigger is that it will change some of the defaults. So watch this. If I create a new trigger now, it's going to automatically change the object to whatever object I had selected. So notice right now the object is small circle. If I click on the triangle and create a new trigger, the object is small triangle. So that's really helpful, a really good way to save time instead of having to click this drop down and find what it is you're looking for. You can just click it on the slide. So the action is change state of. So that's good. We want to change the state of the big shape to, and then we click on this little where it says normal and it will show us all of our options. We want to change the state of it to triangle, not when the user hovers over small triangle, but when the user clicks small triangle. Okay, so we'll press OK on that. And then let's do this. Well, I can just show you now. Let's just preview this really quick to see if it worked. So if I click on the triangle, notice it changes that state to the triangle. That's exactly what we want. That's perfect. Another really cool thing we can do, instead of me clicking this one and creating a new trigger, you can actually copy a trigger. So I could click on this trigger right here that I just created. I could press the copy button, and then I can click on this circle and I can paste that trigger on. So watch when I do that. So I paste it, and now it automatically changes some things for us. So when I double click it, it automatically changed the object to small circle because I pasted it onto the circle. So instead of when the user clicks small triangle, now it changed it to when the user clicks small circle. So copying and pasting can really save a lot of time. If you're in the Storyline Project Lab, you know I talk a lot about that copy, paste, and replace method. And all we need to change at this point is instead of changing the state of big shape to triangle, we need to change the state of big shape to circle when the user clicks small circle. So that's perfect. We'll press OK. I'm going to copy this again, and now I'm going to paste it on the small square. So I'll paste that. And instead of me double clicking this trigger and editing it that way, notice I can just change it right here. When the user clicks small square, change the state of big shape to normal is what we need to change it to, which is right here. Because again, the normal is just like the default state. We can't rename that one to square. So we just need to change the state of it to normal. If we click on the square and look at the states, you'll see that is what it's called. So, and that's everything. That's all we had to do. Now, if we preview this, it should work flawlessly. We can click on each of these shapes and it will change the shape as we want it to. And if you've downloaded this practice file, again, you can just go to story view and then click on slide 2.1 and you can see that programming and copy it just, you know, as you'd like to. Okay, so I have another challenge for you. So this one is called the triangle finder. So behind one of these circles, there's a triangle hidden. And we need to make it so that when the user clicks on each one of these circles, they disappear to show what's hiding behind it. Okay, so again, this is a challenge for you. Go ahead and pause this video if you would like to try to complete the challenge for yourself, and then resume it once you're ready. Okay, here is the reveal. So first things first, I will click on the first circle here. I'm going to create a new trigger. And I'm going to change the state of oval 1, because again, we're still just changing states here. I'm going to change the state of oval 1 to hidden when the user clicks on oval 1. Okay, so that's the goal here. We just want to hide it when the user clicks on it. And if I preview this now, all we've got to do is click on this oval and it disappears. That's the exact functionality we want. If that was holding you back and you still want to give this another go, go ahead and pause the video and see if you can do this for the rest of them. All right, here's the reveal, and this is why we're doing this. It's because to show you the power again of copying and pasting these triggers. So we have a trigger here. If I copy this, I'm going to copy the selected trigger. Notice I can just click on this next oval and paste it. And now if we open this up, it changed two things for us. So it changed the object for us from oval 1 to oval 2, and it changed the object here for us from oval 1 to oval 2. So if you're copying a trigger from one object to another, that object field will update to make copying and pasting super efficient. We don't need to change a single thing for this trigger. And what that means, like, I don't know if you're starting to see the power of this here, but I could click on this. I could hold down the control key and select every single one of these other ovals. And then if I paste that trigger on, it's going to paste to all of them. You see, so now if we scroll down here, we can see for each one of these objects, oval 1, oval 2, oval 3, so on and so forth, every single one of them has that trigger associated with it. So if we preview this now, we will be able to start searching for that triangle. Notice every time we click one, it disappears, and we found the triangle right here. So again, the reveal is in this other scene here if you want to see it with the triggers that I just added, but it's probably straightforward enough. The next examples are going to get slightly more complex. So if you're feeling lost, maybe, go through and practice with these a couple more times. Now we are moving along to the Shape Animator. So let me preview this and show you what's going on here on this slide. So notice that shape animates in and then animates right back out. The challenge I have for you is to stop the shape after it animates in and don't let it animate out until we click on it. Okay, and let me show you what I've done here. Here are the animations up at the top. If we go to the animations tab, I'm going to wind up doing a full video on animations. So again, subscribe for that. It will be coming, but I added a ½ a second fly in animation and a 0.4 second fly out animation. And then I made the timeline only 1 second long by dragging it. So it animates in for the first 5 seconds, and then a 1/10 of a second later, it spends the next 4/10 of a second animating out. That's what's going on here. So go ahead and pause the video if you want to try to resolve this on your own. Otherwise, I'm going to give a hint to you in just a second. Okay, so the hint is you're going to be manipulating the timeline with the triggers to manipulate, you're going to be basing your triggers on where we're at in the timeline. That's your hint. So pause it again, otherwise the full reveal is coming. Okay, so here we go. So let's create a new trigger. And here's the action. We are going to pause the timeline on this slide. So it's all the way down here, because if the timeline is paused, it won't continue on to where the shape starts animating out. And we're going to do that when the animation completes on the square object with the entrance animation. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it is to pause the timeline right at the 0.5 second mark. So if we preview this, now we can see that the shape, the timeline does pause. So we're basically blocking this shape from getting the chance to start animating out because the timeline's pausing right there. And let me show you if we change this to when the timeline reaches 0.5 seconds. That's another way we could do it. And I'm going to preview this. Now we should get the same effect, and it animates in, and right at that 0.5 second mark on the timeline pauses. The second trigger we need now is we need a trigger to resume the timeline. So we're going to change the action to resume timeline on this slide when the user clicks on that square object. So let's preview this now and see how we did. So there we go, it animates in. Notice this is interactive now. I can click it, and then the timeline resumes and the object animates right out. So there we have it. These are these 3 challenges. If you like this kind of challenge experience, that's how the whole Storyline Project Lab is set up. There are over 70 development challenges in there as we learn how to do these different things in Storyline. So if you like that format, which I think is the best way to learn, it's by giving it a go and then getting the reveal. Definitely check out the Storyline Project Lab, which I will link in the description. Otherwise, I have some slightly more advanced topics for you here. These are really important though. This is probably the biggest headache when you're a new e-learning developer. Trigger order. If you aren't familiar with this concept and it causes a problem in your project, you're going to have a very big headache until you get it figured out. So I want to put this on your radar. Even though if you're brand new, it might be a little complex right now, that's okay. Try to see if you know what's going on. So here's the situation. If you have the same when for multiple triggers, like if you're firing them all when the user clicks on something, for example, then they will fire one at a time from top to bottom. Okay, so that might sound confusing. Let me show you what I mean by that. If I click on this button right here, the choice A button, notice it has a couple of triggers. When the user clicks choice A button, jump to the next slide and set your choice to a value. So this is changing a variable. Once again, if we want, I will do a full mini masterclass on variables, but this is the adjust variable action. And to do this, I had to actually create a variable called your choice. Okay, so don't worry about the variable piece right now. If you're new, we'll get to that. But something that you should be aware of too is notice how these are tiny little triggers, they look so thin. They're not nice and big like this. It is because we have multiple triggers for the same when. So Storyline does this. It's called grouping, so that if we want to change it and be like, oh no, we don't want it to do this stuff when you click on choice A button. We want it to do this stuff when something else completely happens. You could change the when, and it will change that for all of these triggers in the group. So the actions can be the same, but you can change the when for multiple triggers at once. So for example, if I want to say, oh, that only happens when the user double clicks, now notice it changed that for both of these. We'll have to double click on this choice A button for these things to happen. Now the other way to view this is to click on this group check mark, and now they're no longer grouped like that. So it's a visual thing. Again, it makes it easier to change the when for multiple things. If I want to change it to double click now, I have to change this to double clicks and change this one to double clicks. So it's just an efficiency thing. Again, if you don't like how it looks here, you can uncheck that group option and it will be displayed a bit differently. But I'm going to leave that on. Okay, so here is what we actually are trying to get to. Notice if the user clicks on this button, first it's going to jump to the next slide, and then it's going to try to change the value of this variable. That's impossible because when you leave a slide, no other triggers from that slide are going to execute. Right? As soon as you tell Storyline, leave this slide, that slide is basically invisible to Storyline. Nothing's going to happen on it. It's not going to be able to read anything from it. It basically goes off into it disappears forever until you restart the course or go back to it. So that's important, because if you do want other things to be happening, like variable changes, for example, that's never going to happen if you leave the slide first. So what I've done here is I set up a reference here that tells us which option we chose. So ideally, we want this to say either choice A or choice B. That's what we're changing the variable to. So I'm going to select these two slides, and we're going to preview the selected slides. And notice now when I click on this, it's going to jump to that next slide before it even sets the variable. So we don't even get to see what we chose. The way to fix that is to click on the trigger we want to move up in the stack, and we can click on this little upward facing arrow right here. Okay, so now we've changed the trigger order, and trigger order is very important. So now when we click on that choice A button, first, it's going to change that variable to choice A, and then it's going to jump to the next slide. So once again, I'll preview these two to show you this. Okay, so I'll click on choice A, and now it tells us you chose choice A. If I retry this though and click choice B, it's going to once again jump to the next slide before changing that variable to choice B, so it's still stuck on choice A. So another way we can change the order is to click and drag on the trigger we want in a different order into the place we want it. So now both of these are correct. It's setting the variable before jumping to the next slide. And there are other cases where this will come into play. So just keep in mind if you're having some issues with triggers, be like, does order matter here? Does one of my is one of my triggers firing earlier going to stop my later triggers from firing? That's really important. And one more thing we'll take a look at here. Let's ignore action, ignore the when. You've also probably noticed this conditions option. This is optional, but this will be very important, especially once we start working with variables. You can say to only execute this action in this case if your choice is equal to like choice A, for example. So you can set conditions like that. You could say only do this if the choice A button is in like a specific state. We're not going to get too far into this, but that's what the conditions piece is. If you were like looking at that and you're like, why isn't Devlin talking about that? It's because we will do a whole video on variables and conditions where we'll actually be able to do this justice. So there we have it. If you want to get more practice with this and you haven't been doing the challenges, feel free to download it and give it a shot. Like I said, I do have another video all about how to use layers in Storyline coming next week, so subscribe for more. There are plenty more of these Storyline masterclasses I can do if you all are enjoying them, so let me know in the comments. And I will see you in the next video. Thanks for being here. Talk to you soon.